Happy last Sunday in Epiphany. Here at church, we like to conclude the Epiphany season in two ways. One is to have a Mardi Gras style celebration, where we can splurge a little before Ash Wednesday, where I'm sure we're all going to fast. And then the second thing we'd love to do every year at the end of Epiphany is hear this story of the Transfiguration. This is the last gospel that we hear before Lent. And so we hear this morning that Jesus takes Peter and James and John up on the mountain, and before them he is changed. And Moses and Elijah appear at his side, and the voice of God comes down to confirm that Jesus is the Son of God. And this is a story about change. I think this is a time of change. Perhaps as we think about Jesus with Peter, James, and John up on the mountain, perhaps we wonder, why did he take only Peter, James, and John? Because without a doubt, every follower of Jesus wanted to go up that mountain with him. Why these three? And one explanation I read this week was that perhaps he took Peter, James, and John because they were his friends. We know that Jesus had many followers. He had many disciples, but among these people, he must have also had friends. And Peter, James, and John were there at the beginning. They were among the first he called. So it makes sense that they had a special relationship as friends. And so the question this morning, are we friends with Jesus? Is that a term that makes sense when we think about our relationship with the one true and living Son of God? Are we friends? And it's a question that I've thought about for 20 years or so. I remember when I was in the ordination process, in the process of being ordained as a priest, you go through this series of interviews where person after person asks you a ton of questions because they want to make sure you'll be a good priest, or at least not a really crazy priest. And so they ask you things like, how do you pray? What's your favorite scripture? How do you deal with conflict? And one woman asked me, are you friends with Jesus? And I had been answering really well, but that question threw me off, because I'd never really thought in those terms before. What a friend we have in Jesus was before my time. So that concept of friends, it makes sense, really. It does make sense. Because when you are friends with someone, you have a relationship with them, and it's a relationship that's built on trust. And you enjoy your friend's company. And you know that they've got your back. And I can think of nothing better than to be happy in the trusting, supportive relationship with Jesus Christ. Because the Jesus that I want is not a Jesus who's up there distant in heaven looking down at me and judging me and telling me that you're doing this and that's wrong. I want a Jesus relationship where we are side by side and we are walking through this life as companions, and I get his support. And we are enjoying this time together, trying to figure life out. And then from time to time, I just throw myself at his mercy. That sounds like a really great relationship, to be friends with Jesus. And so what we have today, I think, is this example of Jesus with his friends going up to this place, on this journey, onto this mountain. And the reason why he's going with his friends is that he wants to show them this profound truth of himself. He wants to lead them further into the heart of God, which is found in Jesus' presence. And so they go up to this holy place. In the scriptures, in the gospel, they call it a high mountain. And in our collect, which is the prayer at the beginning of the service, they call it a holy mountain. And so he wants to be in this place to take their relationship to a new understanding. And of course, when we hear about mountains in the Bible, we are not hearing a piece of the geography of the world, but we are hearing of the geography of the soul. The geography of the soul in the Bible contains wilderness and desert, and we'll hear plenty about wilderness and desert during Lent. And the geography of the soul contains mountains. The mountain is that place up there where Moses got the 10 Commandments. The mountain is that place up there where Psalmist in Psalm 121 looks up and said, where's my help coming from? Oh, it's coming from up there. The mountain is the place where we have mountaintop experiences and epiphanies, and where our souls are accessible to God. Of course, God is everywhere, right? God is everywhere. We believe God is in every place. But there's something very special and spiritual about the mountains. And so Jesus naturally goes there with his friends into this deeper experience of God. And there on the mountain, there is this change. So Peter, James, and John see holiness and divinity and belovedness in the form of Jesus Christ. You know, because they've been traveling with Jesus Christ now for a couple of years, that Peter, James, and John already know that Jesus is holy. They've seen Jesus raise people from the dead. They've seen Jesus walk on water and calm storms. They've heard his words. They know that Jesus is special. But there's a difference between knowing and knowing. It's one thing to know a truth up here in your head, and it's another thing to know a truth in your heart. Religion, which is what we are practicing right now, religion is about the truths of our heart. Of course, we want to know things about God. We want to be aware of Jesus Christ, but where God and Jesus really dwell are here in the heart and the embodiment of our experiences in our lives and in our struggles, where we regularly have knowledge of Jesus Christ. Psalm 139 says, "Such knowledge is so wonderful for me," and this is the knowledge of God. It's this knowledge in our existential life. And I can stand before you and tell you all about the most amazing sunset that I saw this past week, how I was there outside of my house, and it was orange and pink and gold and beautiful, and it changed my life. And you'll say, yeah, that's nice. And I could take out my phone and say, hey, wait, here's a picture of the sunset. It's beautiful, isn't it? And you'll say, yeah, that's pretty. But it's my sunset. It's not yours. I had that experience. So in conveying with you, you need your own sunset experience. And that's the same as this presence of Jesus Christ. We can talk about Jesus. We can share about Jesus. I can preach about Jesus day and night. Well, probably for a half hour at the most. But I can preach about Jesus. And at some point, what we need is that epiphany moment that Peter, James, and John have when he becomes their Jesus. It's the same thing that happens at the beginning of Epiphany. If you remember back the week after Christmas, we heard the story of the three wise men coming from the east following a star. And they followed that star, and there below the star they found the baby. They knelt before him, they bowed before him, and in that moment he became their Jesus. It's interesting that Epiphany begins with the experience of the revelation of God in Jesus Christ by three people, and Epiphany today ends with the experience of the revelation of God in Jesus Christ by three people. And so perhaps we start to think, well, maybe that's what Epiphany is about. It's about realizing God in Jesus Christ here in our lives, not in our hearts. Not in the vague and abstract way, but in the experience that claims the truth. I was reading a book this week which had a really wonderful example of an epiphany. It's a book maybe some of you read called Tattoos on the Heart by Gregory Boyle. And Father Gregory Boyle is a priest in Los Angeles. One time I got to hear him, and he's an amazing speaker. All of his ministry is with gang members in LA. And he's been doing this for a long time. He knows a lot of gang members. And he writes an experience of one day he was at the Central Juvenile Hall in Los Angeles visiting a young man named Omar. And Omar was 17, and probably half of Omar's life he had either been in a gang or he had been in trouble with the jail. And Father Boyle knew him very well. He went to visit Omar regularly. One day, Father Boyle writes, he was visiting Omar, and after a while he had to go. So he got up, and Omar asked, well, where are you going? And the priest said, I have to go say an anniversary mass at a cemetery for a homie, for a gang member who was killed and who I buried a year ago. And Omar was quiet, and after a moment, Omar asked him, how many gang members have you buried who were killed because of gangbanging? And the priest said, 75. Omar said, wow, and he shook his head in disbelief. And quietly, Omar asked, when is it going to end? And the priest took his hand in his, and he looked at him in the eyes, and he said, it'll end the moment you decide. And after a second, Omar looked back and he said, "I decide." And the priest said, "It's that simple. It's always been that simple." And I think Omar knew in his head that he could change his life at any moment. He knew in his head that he could get away from the gangs, that he could amend his life, but he didn't know it here. He didn't know it in his heart, where it really matters. He didn't own that truth until the moment he had an epiphany up on the Holy Mountain, which is the Central Juvenile Hall in Los Angeles. And he saw that truth for himself. We do not go every single day up the mountain with Jesus Christ, but it happens from time to time, and the opportunity is always there. As we think about change, I think the Epiphany is really about change. And as we think about change and what it takes to change our lives, what it takes to change human behavior, it's not just enough to give people information. We live in an age of information. It's not just enough to tell people what they should do and they shouldn't do and how they should live their lives. People have all sorts of information. We can't just tell them stories of beautiful sunsets and the power of Jesus and the love of God and the importance of justice unless these things translate into experiences and epiphanies and they are claimed and owned in the heart. It's just more data. We don't need more data. This week, we heard of another mass shooting at the campus of Michigan State University, not that far from where I grew up. And I was reflecting on how it is that another disgruntled man walks into a public place and kills a bunch of people with a gun he purchased fairly easily. And the question always arises, when is it going to end? And it's the same question that Omar asked Father Boyle, when is it going to end? And the same question was asked by people in Sweetwater, Tennessee, and Louisville, Mississippi, and the Bronx, New York, and Corpus Christi, Texas, and Peyton, Colorado, and Stockton, California, which are just a few of the places where mass shootings have claimed multiple lives in the month of February, including another one that happened since I wrote this sermon. And the question always is, when is it going to end? And the answer, it'll end when we decide it's going to end. Most people are horrified by this carnage, and they will do whatever it takes to stop it, but not everyone. There are hearts that need to be changed. Sin continues. And we're not exempt from sin. If we think about our own lives, think of our own life and the things that we do that we know we should not do. Sin continues, but grace abounds. And what gives me hope is that the experience of Epiphany changes lives. I've seen that again and again. You've seen that, how an epiphany in someone's life makes a huge change. The experience of Epiphany is not just a matter of converting the hearts of Peter and James and John, or touching the lives of Balthazar, Gaspar, and Melchior, but the experience of Epiphany is for everyone. That high and that holy mountain exists somewhere in the Middle East, but it also exists in the juvenile correctional facility in Los Angeles. And it exists in places like East Lansing, Michigan, where mass shootings really do change people's thoughts about gun safety. And it exists wherever we as sinners discover that we are not happy with what we've been doing, and we vow in the name of the Lord to amend our lives, and we do. And that mountain exists in places like this, right here at our altar. And that mountain exists in our scriptures. And that mountain exists in our prayers. And the desire of the Lord never ends. His desire to bring us up to that mountain and to lead us into his love. He will never stop inviting us. If he is our friend, he will never let us go. He will never give up on Omar. He will never give up on any one of us. And what a wonderful message before we descend back down to the valley for Ash Wednesday. It makes sense why this is the message that God gives us and the lectionary gives us before Lent, to end on this mountaintop experience of transformation. Because as we enter into Lent, we need to know that God can change our lives. And Jesus can change our lives. And he can. We know that to be true. Through the power of God, the transfiguration happens and life changes, and I believe that. And every encounter with the living God leaves us a little bit better. And every encounter with the living God leaves the world a little bit safer. And every encounter with the living God makes people a little bit nicer. So we want to push that and move it forward. And together, we move to a better tomorrow through the power of Jesus Christ. And we are reminded today, let's listen to him. Let's listen to what he says. Let's find him in our prayers. Let's find him in our thoughts. And let's dedicate our lives to climbing up that place where he will change us and make us better. Amen.